They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples,
"Sit here while I pray."
He took with him Peter and James and John, and began to be distressed and agitated, and he said to them,
"I am deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and keep awake."
And going a little further, he threw himself on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. He said,
"Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me. Yet, not what I want, but what you want."
He came and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter,
"Simon, are you asleep? Could you not keep awake for 1 hour? Keep awake and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak."
And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And once more he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy, and they did not know what to say to him. He came a third time and said to them,
"Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Enough! The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand."
Immediately, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived, and with him there was a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying,
"The one I will kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard."
So when he came, he went up to him at once and said,
"Rabbi,"
and kissed him. And they laid hands on him and arrested him. But one of those who stood near drew his sword and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Then Jesus said to them,
"Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me, as though I were a bandit? Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not arrest me. But let the scriptures be fulfilled."
All of them deserted him and fled. A certain young man was following him, wearing nothing but a linen cloth. They caught hold of him, but he left the linen cloth and ran off naked. They took Jesus to the high priest, and all of the chief priests, the elders, and the scribes were assembled. Peter had followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest, and he was sitting with the guards, warming himself at the fire. Now the chief priests and the whole council were looking for testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. For many gave false testimony against him, and their testimony did not agree. Some stood up and gave false testimony against him, saying,
"We heard him say, I will destroy the temple that is made with hands. In 3 days I will rebuild another, not made with hands."
But even at this point their testimony did not agree. Then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus,
"Have you no answer? What it is that they testify against you?"
but he was silent and did not answer. Again the high priest asked him,
"Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?"
Jesus said,
"I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the Father, and coming with the clouds of heaven."
Then the high priest tore his clothes and said,
"Why do we still need witnesses? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision?"
All of them condemned him as deserving death. Some began to spit on him, to blindfold him, and to strike him, saying to him,
"Prophecy."
The guards also took him over and beat him. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she stared at him and said,
"You also are of Jesus, the man from Nazareth."
But he denied it, saying,
"I do not know that or understand what you're talking about."
And he went out into the forecourt, and the cock crowed. And the servant girl, on seeing him, began to again say to the bystanders,
"This man is one of them."
But again he denied it. Then after a little while the bystanders again said to Peter,
"Certainly you are one of them, for you are a Galilean."
But he began to curse, and he swore an oath.
"I do not know this man you're talking about."
At that moment the cock crowed for the second time. Then Peter remembered that Jesus had said to him, "Before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times." And he broke down and wept. As soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. Pilate asked him,
Are you the king of the Jews?
He answered him.
You say so.
Then the chief priests accused him of many things. Pilate asked him again,
Have you no answer? See how many charges they bring against you?
but Jesus made no further reply, so that Pilate was amazed. Now at the festival he used to release a prisoner for them, anyone for whom they asked. Now a man called Barabbas was in prison with the rebels who had committed murder against the insurrection. So the crowd came and began to ask Pilate to do for them according to his custom. Then he answered them,
Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?
for he realized that it was out of jealousy that the chief priests had handed him over. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release Barabbas for them instead. Pilate spoke to them again.
Then what do you wish me to do with the man you call the king of the Jews?
They shouted back. Pilate asked them,
Why? What evil has he done?
but they shouted all the more. So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. Then the soldiers led him into the courtyard of the palace, that is, the governor's headquarters, and they called together the whole cohort, and they clothed him in a purple cloak, and after twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on him, and they began saluting him.
Hail, king of the Jews!
They struck his head with a reed, spat upon him, and knelt down in homage to him. After mocking him, they stripped him of the purple cloak and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. They compelled a passerby who was coming in from the country to carry his cross. It was Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus. Then they brought Jesus to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of a skull. And they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him, and divided his clothes among them, casting lots to decide what each would take. It was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him. The inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." And with him they crucified 2 bandits, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by derided him, shaking their heads and saying,
You who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross.
In the same way, the chief priests, along with the scribes, were also mocking him among themselves and saying,
He saved others, he cannot save himself. Let the Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from the cross now, so that we may see and believe.
Those who were crucified with him also taunted him. When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice,
Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani.
which means,
My God, why have you forsaken me?
then some of the bystanders heard it. They said, and someone ran, filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a stick and gave it to him to drink, saying, Then Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in 2 from top to bottom. Now when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said,
Truly this man was God's son.
There were also women looking on from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, and Mary, the mother of James the younger, and of Joseph and Salome. These used to follow him and provided for him when he was in Galilee, and there were many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem. When evening had come, and since it was the day of preparation, that is, the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of the council, who was also himself waiting expectantly for the kingdom of God, went boldly to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate wondered if he were already dead, and summoning the centurion, he asked him whether he had been dead for some time. When he learned from the centurion that he was dead, he granted the body to Joseph. Then Joseph brought a linen cloth, and taking down the body, wrapped it in the linen cloth, and laid it in a tomb that had been hewn out of rock. He then rolled a stone against the door of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where the body was laid.
So I've been asked numerous times over the years about this Palm Sunday liturgy. And why is it that we begin with, waving our palms, we're all excited and upbeat, and we're singing all glory, laud, and honor, and processing in, and it's a glorious moment. And then we hear the reading of the Passion from either Mark or Matthew or Luke's Gospel. And we go from here to here in just a matter of a few minutes. And people say, why do we do that? Why can't we just stay up here? Well, one of the reasons, and I think an important reason that the church, the liturgy calls for the reading of one of the Passion, the Gospels, is because the church realized that many people will not come to church during Holy Week. I know that's hard to believe, isn't it? Yeah. That some people will come today and they will not come until Resurrection Sunday or Saturday night, the great Easter Vigil. And there's a whole lot going on that they will miss. And so they said, we'll get them. We'll show them. We're going to read the Passion on Palm Sunday. They can't get away from it. You can't get to the resurrection until you go through the crucifixion. Because if you don't, it doesn't make sense. Not that it doesn't make sense anyway. So that's one of the reasons why we do that. Now, hopefully, all of you will be able to attend one of the services, at least one or two of the services this week. We have beautiful Tenebrae on. We have Holy Eucharist twice a day, all week. We have Tenebrae, beautiful, beautiful service on Wednesday night. We have Maundy, Thursday, we're remembering that Jesus was with his closest friends, and he got on his knees and washed their feet, and we'll have the washing of the feet and the hands. And then Good Friday with the 7 last words of Christ and the Good Friday liturgy. It's all there, and it's all for you all, and for the church, and for the world. But today, many folks, many preachers will preach a long sermon. My idea, along with lots of others, is that it's hard to follow up and add on anything other than what we just heard read. the passion of Jesus. How do you expand on that? Well, Lance Page said, this is not a text to dissect, but this is a drama to experience. This is a drama to experience. For you and I to experience from a distance. So the crowds that they come in on Palm Sunday, right? Jesus is riding in a colt. They're all loud. They're shouting, they're partying, they're waving their branches and throwing their cloaks. They're having a grand old time. And then there's silence. And then after that, the crowd, after their silence, they shout, "Crucify him. Crucify him." What happened to the crowd that day? What happened to them that they go from following him and praising him and waving their palms and all excited, the King of Kings has arrived, and then they go to saying, "Crucify him"? We're really no different. You see, we come in and we wave our palms, and we sing all glory, laud, and honor, and we get all excited. But unless we process outside of this church, and unless we go to feed the hungry, to give water to the thirsty, to visit those that are sick and in prison, to clothe the naked, unless we do all that for Christ's name, we might as well be saying, "Crucify him." Because that is why Jesus went to the cross. For the world. For you and me and for the entire world. The greatest act of love that we will ever know. So I want you to take this week, whether you're in church this week or not, I just suggest that you take this week and to think again, read again the gospel, the passion. And think from a distance, as many of them were from a distance, think where you would be. Think where you would be. Would you have been one that was hiding for fear of the Roman authorities? Would you have been like Peter, who proclaimed and believed in Jesus, and yet when he was brought an attention to him and was asked, that Peter denied him because he was afraid? He was afraid. Fear overcame him. And that's how he responded. Are you like Peter? Or are you like many of them who stood at a distance? And your heart and your soul had just been stabbed. That all your hopes and your dreams are gone. And you don't know where to turn. And so you stand at a distance. Are you like many of the women who continued to follow, even though their hearts were broken? They followed Jesus to the bitter end. Or like his mother, or his dear friend at the foot of the cross, weeping. This is a drama. This is a drama that we are to experience. May your experience this week be one that opens your heart and your soul and your mind. But don't forget, don't ever forget that Good Friday is not the end. Amen.